Saludos cordiales desde esta esquina de la nación. Esta conversación es con Tom Morello, uno de los guitarristas más importantes de finales del siglo XX y de la década de los 90, cofundador de bandas como Rage Against the Machine, Audioslave y también Prophets of Rage, con quien ha tenido la oportunidad de colaborar con figuras muy importantes como Zack de la Rocha, Chris Cornell y Chuck D de Public Enemy. Está lanzando un nuevo álbum este próximo 15 de octubre que se llama The Atlas Underground Fire. En esta conversación vamos a hablar de ese disco y de su más reciente sencillo, un homenaje a Bon Scott, el líder y cantante original de la banda AC/DC durante una gira que tuvo Mr. Morello con Bruce Springsteen y la E Street Band, y que más adelante se transformaría en una colaboración que fue más allá con Vedder de Pearl Jam. Ese es el primer sencillo de este nuevo álbum, pero la conversación no se queda ahí y profundiza un poco en lo que fue Rage Against the Machine, en lo que significó para muchos de nosotros, en lo que está pasando en Afganistán, en su mirada sobre el activismo, el arte y la música y mucho más. Entonces es un orgullo para mí presentarles esta maravillosa charla con Tom Morello, hablando de su nuevo álbum The Atlas Underground Fire. Tom, it's great having you here on the show. It's great having you on the podcast, on the TV program, and it's definitely a dream come true. And I would like you to take me through the process of, creating this magnificent cover for AC/DC's Highway to Hell with Bruce Springsteen and Vedder. Go ahead.
Sure. So Bruce Springsteen and Vedder and Highway to Hell and I have a history. I was touring with the E Street Band. I played with the E Street Band on and off for about 6 years, and we were in Perth, Australia, the home of Bon Scott, the singer of AC/DC. I went to go pay my respects at his grave in the Perth cemetery, and afterwards came back to the hotel, and I saw Bruce, and I said, do you think that there's a way that the E Street Band and AC/DC might overlap in any way? And he was like, maybe. So we started rehearsing Highway to Hell at soundcheck over the course of the next few dates. And we, when we were in Melbourne, we were playing a big football stadium, 60, 80,000 people. And Vedder happened to be at the show. He was on a solo tour at the time. And I suggested to Bruce, I said, here we are in Australia where AC/DC is king. Here we are in Australia where the song Highway to Hell is like the unofficial national anthem of the country. I said, what if we open the show with Highway to Hell with Vedder? And he was like, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So we did that, and the place went absolutely bananas. I mean, it was like as exciting a moment of rock and roll as anyone's ever been a part of. And as I was making this record, near the end of making this record, where I'm working with a lot of tremendous young artists like Bring Me the Horizon and Fantagram and Chris Stapleton and Grandson and Mike Posner and Damian Marley and Protohype and Femme and Palestinian DJ Sama Abdulhadi, I was like, I want to make a song with my bros, with my brothers. I want to make a song that's like a historical moment. And I reflected back on that night in Perth, or that night in Melbourne, and said, let's take Highway to Hell and try to bring it in. Let's pay our respects to the classic AC/DC, but let's have one of the greatest rock and roll songs of all time now sung by two of the greatest rock and roll singers of all time.
How do you get all the collaborators? How do you pick them? How do you get to record them in the middle of a pandemic? Obviously, technology makes it all easier, but I guess when it comes to musicianship, there has to be like a chemistry or a connection.
Sure. So some of the artists were people I've been friend, like Fantagram and Dennis from Refused, I've known for a while. Other artists I sought out, like Sama Abdulhadi. She's a young Palestinian DJ, and I just love her work, and I thought, I don't know what it's going to sound like when we play together, but I'm interested in finding out. We actually recorded our song, the song we did together, On the Shore of Eternity, while Israel was bombing Palestine. It was in the middle of that, and she was like, we were working together, and she would occasionally have to kind of go and take shelter. Mike Posner, we did a song called Naraka. Naraka is the Hindu word for hell or place of lost souls. And between the beginning of the recording that song and the end of recording that song, he summited Mount Everest. He climbed to the top of, I'm not kidding, that's not metaphorical, that's real. And some of those vocals were recorded at 15, 20,000 meters. So it's crazy. But other Bring Me the Horizon, I'm a huge fan of their big rock and roll music. And and wanted to work with them. But for me, the challenge wasn't so much in finding the right collaborators. That's the fun part. The challenge was actually recording my guitar. I have a studio at my house, but I don't know how to run it. I normally have an engineer who runs it. So, and during lockdown, no engineers were going to be coming, right? So I read an article where Kanye West said that he recorded vocals to a couple of his big records, on the voice memo of his phone. So I tried that with guitar, and it sounded great. Like I started recording riffs into my guitar, and the next thing you know, I was shipping them off to DJs and engineers and producers all over the place, and the Atlas Underground Fire record was born.
That's amazing, because you've always been such an innovator. And to hear you say that, you got engineers around you, but it was like back in the 90s when the whole Rage Against the Machine sound just, hit us. Mm-hmm. It was like one of the greatest contributions you've made to music is your innovation in guitar playing. Well,
thank you. I mean, for me, it was really a matter of, at the beginning of Rage Against the Machine, I began thinking of myself as the DJ in the band, and it really changed the whole way it was like, I love Eddie Van Halen and I love Chuck Berry and I love Keith Richards. But if you think of yourself as the DJ, you start practicing different. You start imagining, I started concentrating on the eccentricities in my playing, on the mistakes in my playing, and started making whole songs out of those things while never giving up the big riff rock.
And it worked. Was it hard back then to be such an innovator? Because one of the things that happens when you're an innovator is that you don't really get embraced as easily as those who just go traditional.
Yeah, well, I can tell you I'll tell you one thing, I didn't care. I was before Rage Against the Machine, I was in another band that had a record deal, and we failed miserably, and I was confident that I was never going to be able to make records. No one was ever going to be able to hear my music. And so I made a solemn vow to myself that if nobody's going to be able to hear my music, I might as well, just be true to myself and make art that's meaningful to me. And that's when I began discovering my own voice on the instrument. I think there's an important difference between musicians and artists. And you can be both, or you can be one and not be the other. But that for me was the real transition. I was a really technically talented musician, but I didn't have my own point of view on the instruments until those early days of Rage Against the Machine. And then once I did develop that language that felt like it was kind of my own language, I began I had that lane all to myself. And so from that day to this, over the course of 20 albums, I've been exploring what I sound like on the electric guitar.
You've always been a great collaborator, but you were talking to Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction on your podcast about the differences between collaborating with certain people and working on a band and actually doing your own thing. How has that worked out for you now? You already have 3 albums, right?
Right. So I mean, I think it's an interesting thing to think about when you're a musician is the solo artist versus the person in a band. The power of being a solo artist is you have a purity of vision, and that from Bruce Springsteen to Bob Dylan to Kanye West. There are people that they're the ones that are making all the decisions at the end of the day, and you get this real kind of pure vision of who that artist is and what they want to say. With a band, you get chemistry, and that is something you cannot get alone. You can only get that in working in conjunction with other musicians. And that's the strength of being able to create something that no one could alone. That's now with the Atlas Underground record, I try to get the best of both worlds. It is a solo record, and I'm the one sort of in charge of the vision and what it's going to be about and what the album artwork looks like. And my guitar is the leading voice on all the songs. However, each of the individual songs is a product of a collaboration, where when we begin the song, I don't know where the song is going to end because I'm working with talented people who are going to push me in different directions. I'm going to push them in different directions, and we're going to wind up in places that we never imagined.
How long did it take you to get all these songs together and finished?
Yeah, it was over. This record was recorded. I mean, I've done a lot of I put out 2 EPs. I put out an EP in last October, another EP sometime, in the earlier on. And so I've been constantly working on music, but this record started to really come together, honestly, in the maybe a couple of months ago, where I was like really clear, like this is the Atlas Underground, like this is what it is. It's not. I've been working with a lot of different musicians during this time, not entirely sure what route I was going to go, but I felt like this feels like it's the next step for me as a guitarist and as an artist and with these collaborations.
Let's talk about musicianship versus artistry, or musicianship, artistry, and activism, and how that all came together in the Rage Against the Machine era. Because I mean, you just said, one thing is to be an artist, another one is to be a musician, and I wonder, how did you guys get all the chemistry in one room to get all those three things take place and explode?
Yeah, well, you can never take that for granted, and it is a miracle. And I'm thankful every day that for Tim and Brad and Zach and that we met. And you're right, it is a like. And here's the thing: is like Rage Against the Machine sounded just like that from day one. Like when we started rehearsing, it sounded like, it wasn't like we had to work our way up to sounding like, it sounded like that day from basically the first time the four of us were in a room. And that is the irreplaceable thing about chemistry. There's nothing that I can create alone that is like that chemistry. But on my own, I'm able to explore different avenues of creativity that I never could in a band situation. So the good news is that, that there's no limit on the number of records you can make and the number of shows you can play. But Rage Against the Machine for me is, I'm forever grateful for, those three guys and the music that we've made together.
And you did it again with Audioslave, which I think is also like those two miracles happened one after the other, man.
I hear you, man. Those are two miracles right there. I remember like when Rage Against the Machine broke up in 2000, the record company, knew that Tim and Brad and I wanted to play together. And they were like sort of suggesting, maybe you guys can be Ozzy Osbourne's band, or maybe you guys can, play with this art. And like, hold on, like, let us try to figure it out on our own. Like, let us try. And fortunately, we made those three records with Chris Cornell and spent that time with him, which was really wonderful. Yeah,
and you did the whole Cuba thing. I was working for Universal Music back then, and I had to release the Audioslave Live in Cuba DVD, and it was one of the most gratifying experiences as a record label guy. That was a real historic moment. I mean, literally a historic moment there. We were the first United States rock band to ever play in the country of Cuba. We broke the rock and roll embargo of Cuba, and it was really just a historic night of rock and roll. That is crazy. Listen, I have to mention this. I remember being living in Homestead, Florida in 1993, mowing the lawn on a hot summer day, and coming right back from mowing the lawn. I was 16, maybe 15, 16 years old, and just, getting in the room, turning on MTV and just getting slapped in the face by the power of freedom. And, for many fans, Killing in the Name seems as though the anthem, especially in South America where there's so much, turbulence going on, and we're always looking for a hymn,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you exposed me to the Leonard Peltier thing, and it was a very important moment in my life. To actually be awakened by a rock band, which is something that doesn't really happen that often, and if it happens, doesn't happen that massively and powerfully as it did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you, but I mean that's just the power of that band to just be a great rock and roll band, so that you're interested in listening to it to begin with. It's not like a college lecture or something like that. Like, and then the compelling lyrics of Zach and the musicianship of everybody. It's a once in a lifetime band, and I've heard that story countless times all over the world. Where for me, it was the Public Enemy and the Clash. That really were those voices. I didn't kind of come to politics because of those bands, but those bands reinforced the idea that I was not alone in the way that I thought, which was a very, very powerful thing. And people ask if rock and roll can change the world, and it quite obviously has. It changed you. It changed me. And if there's one message that runs throughout the entire catalog of my 20 records, is that the world is not going to change itself. That is up to you. And that the people who have changed the world, history is not something that happens. History is something that you make. And the people that have changed the world and the people who have made history are just like your listeners. They're no different. They didn't have any more money, power, courage, influence, creativity, anything. It's people no different from you who have stood up in their place in their time to fight for a more just and decent and humane planet.
What's your take on Afghanistan?
My take on Afghanistan is identical to the take I had the day that the United States stupidly invaded. Was, the problem was a crime committed by 15 or so people, some of them Saudis, some of them, from Pakistan, whatever. And then the United States went on a profit-driven Middle Eastern war rampage that has cost countless lost lives across the entire region. And 20 years later, we're back exactly where we started. It should be everyone who participated in any part of that should be in jail, from George W. Bush to Obama. Like, it is a war crime up and down that the people of Afghanistan did not deserve, and there was never the slightest intention of doing anything right by those people, ever. But at the end of the day, you know what? For the United States, from the way the United States, it was a tremendous success because the arms industry got a lot richer.
I know. I was looking at the numbers, and that's just overwhelming, man.
It's overwhelming. For them, it was a success. They could care less about the death toll or about the current situation there or women's rights or whatever. For them, it was 20 years. There was a lot of profit they made over 20 years.
I got a couple last questions because I only have a couple more minutes, and one of them is: which do you think is more urgent or important to change, the climate crisis or this whole political environment where we're living close to tyrannies? You guys just experienced close to a dictatorship with Donald Trump over there in the States, and it doesn't get any better anywhere in the world.
Yes,
if you had to pick, Tom,
yes.
between solving the climate crisis and politically, what would you do?
First of all, we're facing some really tremendous challenges. I would say that the climate crisis will determine whether or not our civilization moves forward. Honestly, like that's we take for granted that, you and I sit in houses and talk to one another and eat food and breathe the air. Those are things that people may not be able to take for granted, in the not too distant future, if we don't tackle the climate crisis head on. Of course, it's also, I would say that above anything else, but wherever you live, and I'll just reiterate the message I said before, which is things change because people change them. It's not, you don't wish it to be changed. You don't cross your finger. Like, if you're a songwriter, write a song about it. If you're in a union, get your union to stand up for it. If you're an unknown person from the favela, run for office. Use whatever means you have at your disposal, because we are at a historical crossroads where it may or may not work out for humanity, and it's time for all hands on deck.
You asked Chris, number 2 from Anti-Flag, what advice you would give to musicians, or he would give to musicians with activist inclinations, and I'd like to turn the question back to you.
Well, I would say that, first of all, don't be afraid to bring your convictions into your life's work. No matter whether you're a musician or a radio host or a plumber or a college student, is what you believe and what you see as right and wrong in the world should be manifested in what you do. And it's possible, whether it's how and where you spend your money, whether it's joining a union to fight for rights, whether it's marching in the streets, whether it's, teaching your children well, that we are all players on this chessboard. And we're agents of history, and you can either choose to have your hand on the wheel, or you can sit on the sidelines and let some other sons of bitches run the thing into a ditch.
If you had to pick a protest song of all time, which one would be your pick?
Ooh, I'll just off the top of my, there's sort of 3 that come out. I'll just say them off the top of my head. One would be Peter Gabriel's Biko, about the South African activist Biko, who was murdered by police, that became a global anthem that helped to end apartheid. One would be John Lennon's Imagine, which, couched in that beautiful melody, is a radical anarchist anthem. And then lastly, I would say maybe Bob Marley's Redemption Song, which is kind of or Get Up, Stand Up. Get Up, Stand Up, you hear a lot more in the streets, but the Redemption Song is a there's a spiritual element to it, along with a protest element, which I think is very powerful.
I look forward to hearing the entire album. I hope that somewhere in the near future, you guys get together with Rage Against the Machine and make it to Colombia, South America, because that's something we've looked forward to over the course of 25 years.
Lives. Yeah, all of my life too. I've looked forward to it. So I hope that we are able to travel there in the hopefully not too distant future, but we'll see.
Thank you so very much for taking the time. It's been great meeting you, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thank you for your thoughtful questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.